Today's presentation will provide insight on the purpose and function of the SDGs broadly, and also the relationship between urban centers. As you know, we're here in Richmond Hill, high growth area, infill area, and we're about building strong, complete communities here through the work that we do in the city building. So we've invited our partners here to give us a bit of insight on what it means to be partners here and to learn about how SDGs are impacting the work that we do and how we work. We are going to hear about case studies of SDG projects from cities around the world and learn how some of Richmond Hill's work connects to and supports the global framework. So our first speaker is Dr. Rohit Ramchandani. He's the Innovation and Strategic Partnership Officer at the UNU-INWEH, and he is a public health expert specializing in global health, innovation, implementation, science, and behavioral-centered design. His work focuses on bridging the science policy gap to increase awareness of global challenges and the impact solutions at the intersection of water, environment, and health. So following that presentation, Miles O'Brien, Sustainability Coordinator here at the city, will also provide a presentation overview on the work that he does. So I would like to hand it off to Rohit, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ruth. And good morning, everyone. Can everyone hear me okay? Excellent. Well, thank you for joining us today for this SDG 101 session focused on providing an introduction to the Sustainable Development Goals for cities, and in this case, for Richmond Hill. Today's session has been designed to introduce city staff to the UN SDGs, and this presentation is really a product of an ongoing global municipal partnership on sustainability transitions between UNU-INWEH and Richmond Hill, which as of last year is our new host city. And this partnership focuses on advancing the city's environmental and sustainability strategies, exploring mutually beneficial intersections between the city and the UN system. Over the next 40 minutes or so, we'll explore what the SDGs are, why cities are so central to achieving them, and explore some noteworthy examples of addressing the SDGs from a couple of cities around the world. And so it's my great pleasure to be your guide today as we explore the relevance of and some of the intersections between the SDGs and cities. So UNU-INWEH is one of 13 institutions around the world that make up the United Nations University, which is essentially the academic and research arm of the UN system, headquartered in Tokyo, Japan, and focused on bridging evidence, policy, and practice. And we do this by contributing through collaborative research and education, the best evidence from the international academic community towards policy and practice efforts that are focused on resolving the global grand challenges of human survival, development, and welfare that are essentially the concern of the United Nations, its member states, and its people. So UNU is led by a rector who holds the rank of Undersecretary General of the UN, and that position is currently held by our 7th rector, Professor Marwala. Now, at UNU-INWEH, we are the institution focused on tackling humanity's most complex and interconnected water, environment, and health challenges. So each institution has a different area, often aligned with the SDGs. And we're represented by our kind of current strategic areas of focus, which you can see on the right side of the slide there. And we've been doing that for almost 3 decades now, with our work spanning high impact research and innovation, education and capacity building, as well as policy impact and advocacy. And while we focus on this kind of broader water, environment, and health nexus, we're often referred to as the UN's dedicated think tank on water. And that's because we recognize that water, while fundamental to life itself and a key driver of development, remains central to the interlinked challenges that are encompassed in the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, which we'll be exploring today. And so whether it's trying to achieve zero hunger or affordable and clean energy, good health and well-being, of course, clean water and sanitation, or any of the others, water serves as a powerful pathway for understanding the kind of inextricable linkages between the 17 transformational objectives. So what are the Sustainable Development Goals? The SDGs represent a comprehensive blueprint of 17 interconnected goals that were unanimously adopted by all 193 UN member states in September of 2015 as part of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. And I want to emphasize the point about unanimous adoption here, because I'm sure you can imagine, especially within our current global context, that getting 193 countries to unanimously agree on anything is a Herculean task. However, it was universally agreed that these ambitious goals for transforming our world provide a shared framework for governments and businesses, civil society, communities, and individuals alike to collaborate on addressing our world's most pressing social, economic, and environmental challenges, covering everything from eradication of poverty to safeguarding our planet's ecosystems to the health and well-being of populations and ensuring inclusive and equitable prosperity for all by 2030. And I think there's something, sometimes kind of a misconception that these goals are targeted at developing countries and not relevant to high-income countries, or so-called developed nations. But this is indeed a misconception. This blueprint for peace and prosperity for people and planet is an urgent call for action for all countries, developed and developing alike. The SDGs aren't about aid or fixing others. They're about shared global challenges and mutual responsibilities, and they're a basis for cooperation and multilateralism. And purposefully, they were designed that way. The fact is that no country has finished the job of sustainable development. And in fact, if anything, high-income countries have a disproportionate global impact, accounting for a majority of global carbon emissions, driving global consumption and supply chains, and often influencing global trade, finance, and governance systems. And so without addressing the systemic contributions from these nations, progress on the global goals is really impossible. So these are certainly not kind of North versus South types of issues. They really help reflect. They're a mirror, right? They help reflect our global challenges as well as our local blind spots. The SDGs evolved from what were called the MDGs, the Millennium Development Goals, and they're the product of a collaboration across governments and subject matter experts, civil society, the private sector, local communities from really every corner of the world, including over 7 million citizens. And that was a process that took place over 3 years to arrive at these 17 goals. This is certainly kind of reflected, this global focus reflected in how the SDGs have been operationalized across different geographies and contexts to form really an internationally recognized set of goals and targets, which aim to promote development in these three kind of core areas of economy, environment, and society, this triple bottom line. Together, the 17 goals consist of 169 specific targets, over 230 key performance indicators for measuring our progress in kind of objective and quantifiable ways. And together, they have galvanized the world's collective action. Just to give you a sense of how the goals break down to targets and specific measurable indicators, let's kind of zoom in on those associated with goal 6 to ensure the availability and sustainable management of water and sanitation for all, which has 8 targets and 11 indicators. So the targets specify the goals, while indicators represent the metrics by which the world aims to track whether these targets are being achieved or not. So the indicator for target 6.1, which is to achieve universal and equitable access to safe and affordable drinking water for all by 2030, is the proportion of the population using safely managed drinking water services, where safely managed drinking water service is very well defined as an improved source located on premises, available when needed, and free from fecal and priority chemical contamination. These are either pathogens like E. coli or other coliforms, or chemicals like arsenic and fluoride, etc. So the level of specificity and detailed guidance for defining and tracking SDG related data is actually now quite advanced. And if we look at another example, let's use part of target 6.4 to ensure sustainable withdrawals and supply of fresh water to address water scarcity and substantially reduce the number of people that are suffering from water scarcity. The indicator for that target is the level of water stress, which is defined as freshwater withdrawal as a proportion of the available freshwater resources, the total amount. And so if we wanted to explore these indicators further, we can, there's lots of data around these from pending on the sources, right? So pending on the geographies. And these graphs show global heat maps related to indicators 611 and 642. So from 2015 to 2024, the population using safely managed drinking water increased from 68 to 74% globally. However, as reflected by the map on the left, globally, we still have 2.1 billion people without access to safely managed drinking water. Most significantly, of course, in this case, in the global south. Similarly, 3.4 billion people still live without safely managed sanitation. 1.7 billion people live without basic hygiene services. So this is really a global public health and development crisis, with billions of people still lacking access to some of the most fundamental human needs, right? Clean water, sanitation, hygiene. And the implications are severe for health, of course, which is, it leads to waterborne diseases like diarrhea, which is the second leading infectious cause of childhood mortality globally, in fact. It has implications for gender equality, right? Disproportionately impacting women and girls who often bear the burden of water collection and face safety risks due to inadequate sanitation. For education and productivity, right? Affecting school attendance, especially for girls during menstruation, and reducing time for work and studying. As well as for climate resilience, undermining the ability of communities to adapt to climate-related water stress and other disasters. The map on the right actually classifies water stress, right, which is that ratio I was talking about between total fresh water that's being withdrawn by all major sectors of the economy, agriculture, industry, domestic use, to the total renewable freshwater resources that are available. And it divides it into 5 classes, from less than 25%, meaning no stress, all the way to what's shown in red, which is withdrawals over 100%, which means critical stress. And here we can see that water stress varies significantly across regions, with Northern Africa and Western Asia, as well as Southern and Central Asia, facing extreme scarcity, right? So there are actually countries in the world who are having such extensive challenges accessing water, that they're in red here. You can also see the differences that exist within North America, right, where it's not just about physical scarcity, but increasingly about political tension and potential governance risks. So take the Columbia River, for example. It starts in British Columbia, Canada, and flows down into the US, powering about 40% of America's hydroelectric generation. And for decades, a treaty has governed how that water is shared, ensuring flood control, electricity, and fair benefit on both sides. But in 2024, these negotiations were actually paused. Why? Because the US, under new leadership, began threatening to dismantle key agreements with Canada, even referring to the border as imaginary and joking about, a large faucet in BC that could be turned on to solve California's drought challenges. These comments in the stalled treaty reveal the fragility of even, long-standing cooperative water sharing arrangements and highlight just how geopolitically vulnerable water security can become even in high-income countries. Now, this graphic for colleagues it's from colleagues at Our World in Data, which is a collaborative effort between researchers at Oxford University and the not-for-profit Global Change Data Lab, is an attempt to capture which of the 230 SDG indicators actually had good data available back in 2018. And so the indicators in green, they show basically where there was a very good data. The ones in yellow show where they had official metrics, but data wasn't very, it was very incomplete or outdated. And the ones in red didn't have global monitoring or comparable data available. And you can see that while data was available for many indicators, there were a number of gaps. Now, the good thing is that we've had significant advancements since this graphic was developed back in 2018. And that is the power of the SDG framework. Because if we can't objectively measure these things with data, we're subject to the whims and potential misinformation and disinformation that is fed to us by potential interest groups and ideologues, or even well-meaning but misinformed actors. But with clear, shared sets of indicators and targets, we can hold ourselves and our governments accountable. Right? So we can see where our systems have gaps, we can track real progress, and we can make evidence-based decisions to improve lives and protect the planet. So I did a comparison of the indicators that fell into the green, yellow, and red categories from 2018. Today, they're referred to as Tier 1, 2, and 3. And compare them to where we are today. And like I said, we've seen significant progress, right? So the number of Tier 1 indicators grew by over 68% from 2018 to 25. Today, 157 of the indicators would be green. The number of indicators falling into Tier 3 was actually eliminated completely. And more than 51% of indicators in more than half of all countries now have good data trends, at least 2 data points since 2015, which reflect really a major statistical milestone. But that said, data coverage remains an issue. 66 indicators still lack sufficient country-level data, particularly in areas like disaggregated data, which shows differences between ages and genders, income disparities, different geographies within countries, environmental impacts, as well as governance and peace-related metrics. And so while there's been significant progress on the data quality and on the collection front, the story, however, that these metrics paint is actually quite troubling. So how do we know where the world stands on the SDGs? Each year, they have an annual SDG progress report. There's a high-level political forum on sustainable development, which is held and hosted by the UN system. And that's actually coming up very shortly in July in New York. As part of this process, there's also something called voluntary national reviews, or VNRs, where countries share their progress, the successes, the gaps, and yes, the hard lessons. And increasingly, cities are stepping onto that stage through local reviews and partnerships, showing how progress or failure is playing out on the ground. So let's take a look at where we stand today in achieving the SDGs and why this matters so much for cities. The 2024 SDG Progress Report reveals really a sobering truth. Only 17% of SDG targets are currently on track to be achieved by 2030. Nearly half are showing only moderate or minimal progress, and over 1/3 have either stalled or actually regressed, slipping below 2015 levels. So you can see this breakdown in the bar graph in the first column here. These aren't just statistics, right? They reflect real setbacks in the lives of people, in the health of our ecosystems, and in the resilience of our cities. And much of the early momentum that we saw in the SDG era, there were a lot of advancements. There was a lot of progress being made on these indicators. But after the COVID-19 pandemic, escalating conflicts, economic fragmentation, trade disruptions, and the growing toll of the climate crisis, they've all hit really hard and often worst in the world's most vulnerable regions. So in just a few years, 23 million more people have fallen into extreme poverty. 123 million more are suffering from hunger. And income gaps are widening, especially between the poorest and the richest countries. And in cities, this inequality shows up as deepening housing insecurity, food deserts, climate vulnerability, etc. And so, progress on global health has slowed as well. Education systems tend to be faltering. Just 58% of children worldwide meet basic reading benchmarks by the end of primary school, and 1 in 5 youth are not in school, training, or work. So these challenges have of course, serious implications for the future of innovation, equity, urban labor markets. The majority of which will be comprised of youth that are residing in Africa and Asia. That's where, if we look at population demography and statistics at a global level, that's where the future, the working population of the future, where they reside. Gender equality remains elusive as well. Women and girls still face persistent barriers in leadership and employment and safety. With bold action, though, we will fall short without it. Not only on SDG 5 on gender equality, but on all of the 2030 vision, because gender justice and particularly the empowerment of women is really foundational to all progress. Biodiversity as well. The outlook is dire. Despite some emissions cuts in high-income countries, greenhouse gas concentrations hit record highs in 2022, and they're still rising. Carbon dioxide levels are now 150% above pre-industrial levels. Ocean acidification is worsening, and species extinction risk is growing rapidly. And cities, especially coastal ones, are on the front lines of these kind of planetary crises. And to this, a world where conflict and forced displacement have surged, 110 million people are displaced globally today, and a 72% increase in civilian casualties from armed conflict have occurred over the past year. So there are, however, glimmers of hope. So not to paint this kind of dire picture, progress continues on reducing infant mortality, expanding access to water, energy, mobile broadband, and cutting the cost of remittances. And many countries and cities are showing real leadership in advancing SDG transformation at the local level. The 2023 SDG Summit reaffirmed a very powerful message that governments remain united behind the 2030 agenda, but solidarity is really not enough. We need speed, we need scale, we need action. And that means really 3 big shifts. One is peace, of course, right? Ending the conflicts that drive displacement and destabilize development. Financing, of course, creating fiscal space and a fair international financial system, especially for developing countries. And then transitions, right? Investing in energy, food, digital access, social protections, while transforming education and jobs for the future. And cities, of course, are central to all three of these. They are where the investments, where innovation, institutional reforms have to take root. They're where inclusion can happen or where exclusion can deepen. And they're where the SDGs become real. And so let's take a look at cities now, kind of really dive in, and where we can do that is by taking a deeper look at the role that cities play within SDG 11. So cities are hubs for ideas, for commerce, for culture, science, and productivity, as well as the social, environmental, and economic development broadly, right? Urban planning, transport systems, water, sanitation, waste management, disaster mitigation, or access to information, education, and capacity building. They're all relevant issues to sustainable urban development. So goal 11 is about making cities and human settlements accessible, inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. Why? Because cities are the future of global living. The world's population hit 8 billion people in 2022, and more than half of us now live in cities. By 2050, nearly 70% of the global population will call a city home. But many cities aren't ready. Right? Urbanization is accelerating faster than our ability to build the housing, infrastructure, and public services that are needed to support it. And that's why today, over 1.1 billion people live in slums or slum-like conditions. And that number could nearly triple in the next 30 years. Cities only take up about 3% of the Earth's surface, but they account for 60 to 80% of global energy use and over 75% of carbon emissions. They're also on the front lines of inequality, pollution, and climate risk, particularly in small and rapidly growing towns across the global south. Now, despite the challenges, we've made progress. And since the SDGs were adopted in 2015, the number of countries with national and local disaster risk reduction strategies has doubled. But more, of course, needs to be done. In 2022, only half of the urban population had convenient access to public transport. Sprawl continues to outpace smart growth. Air pollution remains a health crisis, and too many people still lack access to safe public spaces. So why does this matter? Because if cities fail, we all feel it. You know, whether it's through air quality or rising house costs, traffic gridlock, economic stagnation, or social unrest, cities are where inequality, climate change, and public health, where they all collide. But they're also where some of the most powerful solutions can come from. So poorly planned cities lead to slums, traffic chaos, and environmental degradation, but well-planned, inclusive cities, they create jobs, they improve health, they strengthen communities and reduce emissions, often at lower cost than we think, right? So take public transport as an example. It may require investment up front, but the long-term gains in terms of productivity, air quality, and quality of life have been shown to be significant. So what can each of us do? We can start by becoming more engaged in the governance of our communities, which is what all of you do for a living. We can ask questions like, are there enough jobs near where people live? Is the air clean? Can our kids walk to school safely? How accessible is public transport? What does your public space look like? The more we shape our neighborhoods with intention, the more we contribute to the broader success of our cities and to SDG 11. So let's take a closer look at where we are today in terms of SDG 11 specifics, okay? As I noted previously, 1.12 billion people lived in slums or slum-like conditions, 130 million more than in 2015. And that's nearly a quarter of the world's urban population. Sub-Saharan Africa has the highest share, where over 53% of city dwellers live in slums. And unless we act now, the region is projected to add 360 million more slum dwellers by 2030. For public transport, okay, that's target 11.2. Globally, 6 in 10 people in cities have convenient access to public transport, but this hides this kind of deep inequality. So in the least developed countries, it's 4 in 10, while in richer regions, it's 8 and 10. So access needs to be expanded urgently, especially in those poor, underserved urban neighborhoods. Urban sprawl as another example, another growing challenge. But between 2000 and 2020, cities expanded up to 3.7 times faster than they grew denser. Okay, so expanded in terms of area. That means more land is being taken up, often at the expense of nature, right? So without increasing the number of people per square kilometer. So sprawl averaged 5.6% per year, while densification lagged at 1.5%. If we look at target 11.5, which focuses on resilience, disasters damage over 100,000 critical infrastructure units each year and disrupted over 1.6 million basic services like schools and clinics annually. Cities must become more resilient, especially as climate-related disasters are accelerating. And that's not just a global South issue. We're seeing it happen in Canada, the US, in Europe as well. Canada just saw one of its first extreme water warnings. So target 11.6 focuses on air quality. There's one bright spot. Since the SDGs were launched, fine particulate air pollution has dropped globally by 9%, aligning with the WHO's first interim target. That progress, that for sure is progress, but we have really a long way to go to ensure healthy air for all. And that is very closely linked to public spaces, green spaces, which is target 11.7. So access to green and open public space remains deeply unequal. In the least developed countries, fewer than 3 in 10 urban residents can easily reach a public park or green area. In wealthier regions, it's closer to 6 or 7 in 10. Disaster risk reduction, which is target 11B. There's promising news on local governance. 106 countries now report that local disaster risk reduction strategies are in place. And on average, 72% of local governments in those countries have adopted them in line with national strategies. So just a closing thought on SDG 11, which is that, cities are where the SDGs converge, right? And SDG 11 really reflects the full kind of complexity of what's at stake, from housing and transit to air quality and disaster resilience. Cities need integrated, people-centered strategies to thrive, and the time to act is now, right? Before sprawl, risk, and equality kind of outpace our solutions. So as we start to wrap up here, I just wanted to share a couple of sample case studies from cities around the world that are addressing different SDGs in bold and novel ways. There are many examples from many parts of the world. So, the ones I'm presenting here are just meant to be a kind of a sample. And I'd encourage you to check out initiatives like the C40 Cities Initiative, the World Urban Pavilion, and the World Urban Economic Forum, and many others that have great examples and case studies that you can explore. The first case study I wanted to present focuses on zero emission areas. As cities around the world work to kind of curb emissions and improve urban quality of life, zero emission areas, or ZEAs, are emerging as bold transformational solutions. These zones are not just about reducing tailpipe pollution. They're kind of comprehensive strategies that reshape how people move, breathe, and live in cities. By definition, ZEAs aim for zero tailpipe greenhouse gas emissions from all trips within a designated urban area. But that includes walking, cycling, public transit, and zero emission vehicles like electric and hydrogen powered cars and trucks. But ZEAs go far beyond vehicles. They prioritize health, equity, safety, and economic vibrancy while helping cities meet their climate goals. More than 35 cities worldwide, through the Green and Healthy Streets Declaration, have actually committed to establishing major ZEAs by 2030. And so I wanted to just, I'll give you one example maybe. I have examples here for Amsterdam and for Barcelona, but I'll just, let's just cover Amsterdam for the moment for time purposes. So Amsterdam has long been, a global leader in sustainable mobility, famous for its extensive bike lanes and walkable streets and high transit use, but it's now going even further with an ambitious plan. By 2030, the entire city will become a zero emission area. The city began in 2020 by banning diesel vehicles in the city center. By 2025, that's this year, all traffic within the A10 ring road, which is that top map that you see on the right there, including taxis, ferries, and pleasure boats, must be emission free. And then by 2030, all motorized traffic throughout Amsterdam will need to be zero emission. And this transition is being supported by a massive investment in EV charging infrastructure, including smarter demand-responsive charging networks, subsidies and incentives to help residents and businesses kind of shift to clean transport. They have strict regulations, of course, phasing out polluting vehicles and expanding low emission zones outward in these kind of concentric circles. And importantly, a public campaign, right, that engages citizens and communicates the personal and environmental benefits of clean air. I'll give you one more case study here, and that provides a real-world example of how the concept of integrated infrastructure works in a smart city. And the example here is from the Hilly district in Malmö, Sweden. Integrated infrastructure is about designing urban systems like energy, water, transport, waste, and data as a kind of coordinated whole, rather than having these kind of siloed services. And often we see that even in the design of how our municipality governance is structured, where you have one department and another department, and never shall the twain meet kind of thing. And when these systems are kind of digitally connected, monitored, and managed in real time, we get smarter, more resilient, and more sustainable cities. So Hilly was developed with this exact vision in mind. Once it was previously, it was an industrial periphery. Hilly is now Malmö's flagship climate smart district, designed through a public-private partnership between the city of Malmö, the energy provider, and the regional water utility. Their goal was to create an urban testbed for decarbonized, circular, and digitally responsive infrastructure, a model for other cities to follow, is what they're trying to become. And so their integrated infrastructure includes a renewable energy mix using solar, wind, biogas, and recovered heat from data centers and waste incineration, a district energy sharing system called EctoGrid, which connects buildings to exchange heating and cooling based on demand, which has been shown to reduce energy waste significantly. They have a smart data layer within EctoCloud that collects real-time sensor data from across the district and dynamically then adjusts supply and usage for efficiency. This coordination across energy, water, and digital systems, it really exemplifies what we mean by infrastructure integration. And this integration delivers big results. There's been a dramatic drop in fossil energy use and emissions in Hilly, real-time energy balancing across residential, commercial, and public buildings, resilience in the face of heat waves or power outages due to shared and decentralized systems. And the model is replicable, right? So EON, their energy organization, has begun exporting this EctoGrid concept to other European cities like Hamburg and London. And these are all helping advance, SDG 7 on affordable clean energy through renewable and smart grids, SDG 9 industry, innovation and infrastructure via kind of advanced tech systems, SDG 11 sustainable cities and communities, of course, right, through planning and equity, and then SDG 13 by reducing emissions and improving resilience. So Hilly shows us that smart cities aren't just about kind of flashy tech. They require kind of cross-sectoral planning, shared data systems, circular resource flows, and collaborative governance. And that leads to greater livability, adaptability, and efficiency. This is my final slide. And as we come to a close, I just want to bring us back to one of the most vital takeaways of this entire agenda. And that is that SDGs are not just a checklist. They're a living system. And to navigate them, we need to think like systems thinkers, right? So let's return to using water as a lens for understanding this idea. You know, at first glance, it may seem like a technical or environmental issue, but zoom out just a bit and the interconnections become very, very clear, right? As the global population rises from from over 8 billion right now today to 8.5 billion by 2050, especially in developing regions, demand for water is going to skyrocket, not just for drinking, but for food, for energy, for industry, and for daily living. And where will most of these people live? They'll live in cities. Urban areas are at the front lines of this transformation. Cities already consume, like I said, over 2/3 of global energy. They generate the majority of emissions, and they concentrate both opportunity and vulnerability. So from increasing water demand to waste management, food systems, public health, cities are where the SDG progress or failure will be most visible and most felt. And so in regions like Europe and North America, over 90% of a person's water footprint is typically indirect. It's embedded in agriculture, food, and consumer products, especially those with high water intensity like meat, dairy, coffee, and processed goods. And as urban diets kind of shift towards these more water-intensive consumption patterns, the strain on ecosystems and water systems also intensifies. To meet these demands, we're clearing forests, we're degrading land, we're polluting waterways, which then feeds back into climate change, biodiversity loss, and rising disaster risk, especially in densely populated areas. And so here's where the interconnectedness and trade-offs become really critical. You know, so the SDGs are filled with these kinds of feedback loops, and progress on one goal can either uplift or undermine another. You know, one of our recent publications showed that expanding irrigation, right, it improves child nutrition, a great outcome, right? SDG 2s for zero hunger, SDG 3, good health and well-being. But paradoxically, the greatest gains are actually happening in regions already suffering severe water stress. So we're solving one problem, but possibly deepening another. That's the kind of trade-off that can't be ignored. And so it's why systems thinking isn't just helpful, it's really essential. And nowhere is this more important than in cities, which really sit at the intersection of all of these different SDGs. So cities, you know, are a powerful systems laboratories, essentially, right, for integrated solutions, for innovation, for inclusive governance. And so if we approach the SDGs in these kind of siloed ways, we risk chasing progress that either will be unsustainable or exclusive. But if we embrace this kind of integrated, feedback-aware mindset, we can design solutions that are mutually reinforcing and more circular, like urban policies that connect water governance with food systems, with climate resilience, social equity, you know, as well as health. So the final message is simple but powerful, that the SDGs are deeply connected. Cities are where this interconnectedness becomes real, whether in the global south or in the global north. Systems thinking is the key to unlocking their full potential, and that requires partnership and breaking down silos, not just to avoid kind of unintended consequences, but to seize the synergies that can really transform our world. So I'll stop there.
Thanks very much, Rohit. Certainly given us a lot to think about, and a great overview of that global framework and really how it applies to cities. Let me just briefly connect some of what you were saying to our Richmond Hill context. And I know we're getting close to 11 here, and I know we had tried to build in some time for questions and answers. If you do have any questions, I'd I'd say, definitely feel free to add them to the chat at any point. If we can't get to them, I'd be happy to, to follow up after our talk to try to answer those.
I'm happy to, stay on a little longer if helpful.
Likewise. Yeah, thanks, Rohit. Okay, so just very briefly, let me try to connect what Rohit was saying to some examples in Richmond Hill. So I think the main thing I'll try to focus on is Rohit's comment around interconnectedness and integrated approaches for city planning, and how that really is essential to tackling some of the SDGs. I think we can look at the list that's on the screen there, look at some of our policies and plans and projects, and see pretty quickly that Richmond Hill is definitely taking this approach. So we're setting ourselves up very well to be tackling some of these issues. So whether it's our official or strategic plans, all the way through, more kind of specific plans and into projects. And I put a picture here of Minthorn Park, which I think is a great example of how some of those layers really are being integrated around the social and the environmental, especially. So as well, just to kind of reiterate that this sort of holistic vision of sustainability that Rohit talked about through the SDGs, it's essential for cities. I think it's also an opportunity, and I think Richmond Hill is really in a moment where we're showing leadership around this approach, and that leadership in the sense of the SDGs really shows solidarity with these other places in the world, other cities that are taking those steps and taking that approach. So just quickly to touch on a few of the kind of urban-focused SDGs that came up in Rohit's presentation that you might have seen. These are the ones that really are quite relevant to Richmond Hill. Again, just to briefly point out that the targets, within those SDGs, in this case, things like renewable energy efficiency, are certainly being built into Richmond Hill's plans and projects. So as an example, plans are underway right now to add solar PV panels to the roof of Tom Graham Arena. So taking kind of one of our core municipal, responsibilities or services and adding that layer of sustainability on there. Rohit talked a lot about SDG 11, lots of targets that apply and lots of connection points for Richmond Hill. So, something upcoming that, in the works is our Richmond Hill Center through the secondary plan. We know that there's the intention to really integrate, again, a lot of these connection points, right, around transit, livability, walkability, spaces for people, right, not just spaces for buildings or cars. We talked a bit about this consumption issue, especially in cities. So again, a lot of connection points for Richmond Hill. And we know that Richmond Hill, working with York Region, is really continuing to show that leadership around waste management, waste diversion, and now this shift to the circular economy. Climate action, again, lots of work going on municipally around mitigation and adaptation. And again, trying to look at that in an integrated way. So it's not kind of a siloed approach, but something that really is being integrated, into the various aspects of our municipal work. So one good example that's been occurring for a number of years is our stormwater management program that is sort of staying, I'd say, ahead of the curve in terms of trying to pay attention to the basic need, but also the paying attention to that threat that climate change poses to to maybe increase or produce new hazards along those lines. And finally, life on land. So this one's focused a little more squarely on environmental protection, but again, I think Richmond Hill has some great examples of how our approach is really trying to integrate that value with the other values of of a livable city. So in this case that I brought up, our tree preservation bylaw, working with our residents to really try to encourage the residents to take ownership of our tree canopy. So through this process of permitting and replacing trees, etc. Trying to maintain our canopy, but again, really integrate that into the way that our residents live in the community. Okay, so that was quite brief. Those are my examples. I apologize that we're just about at 11 o'clock now, but I want to just take a quick minute to thank Rohit Ramchandani for the excellent presentation to walk us through the SDGs, their relevance to various parts of the world and various issues, but especially the urban context, which is really so relevant for Richmond Hill at the moment. I think if anyone did want to stay on, it's 11 o'clock now. I think both Rohit and I are happy to stay on and take any questions. Like I said, you're more than welcome to submit any questions for follow-up. We'd be happy to do that. And again, we've recorded this session, so if anyone did have any follow-up questions or needs, we can always refer back to that. So thanks so much, everyone, for attending. Again, we're happy to stay on the call, but of course, please move on to your next responsibility as needed. But we'll stay on for a few minutes and see if there's any follow-up needed. And Ruth, I don't know if yourself or Rohit had any closing thoughts?
No, thank you so much for the interest, especially from staff. These are just, this year is our first round of engagement in regards to learning from a staff perspective on all the good work that we do as a municipality. And we are looking forward to the fall session of the Coffee and Climate Change series that we're embarking on in the planning now. We heard a lot from staff last year in regards to the projects that they're interested in and how they'd like to be engaged. So we're taking that back and we're developing a new program for the fall. So hopefully everybody has an opportunity to log in the fall to listen. And if there's any suggestions, please let us know in terms of what you would like to learn. Please reach out and let us know if there's anything specific that you're interested in.
And from our end, just a big thanks on behalf of UNU-INWEH. We've really enjoyed working with different departments across the city. Been recently involved with the mayor's SDG speaker series, which has also been taking place. We just recently held a session at the Center for Performing Arts in Richmond Hill. Had a fireside chat focused on local food. A few months back, we had another one this was more in depth, kind of on introduction to SDGs, but similarly looking at the role of SDGs in cities. And so, yeah, it's been great conversations. We've been involved in, reviewing some of the city's strategies and just adding, perspective and examples. And, that's kind of where the partnership has started. And so we're really excited to see, where we can take it as well. So thanks everyone for joining. And if there's any questions, of course, happy to.
I'll stay on. Okay, I do see a question from John Thompson. So I'm just going back and forth here. The U.S. earlier this year has rejected and denounced the UN SDGs and has implemented global tariffs to many developing countries around the world that have already experiencing extreme poverty and is expanding oil and gas drilling around the world. How is this impacting the longer-term prospects of the SDGs when the most powerful UN member is no longer seems to be on board?
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, this is a big question, right? And I mean, I guess my initial response would be, we can't let, one country, despite it being one of the most powerful countries in the world, kind of dictate the kind of strategic and moral values that we want to kind of establish as a global community, because those variations, politics, elections, those will come and those will go, and we really need to be thinking, more holistically, more broadly, and that has been the direction of the human species, and so, I would just emphasize the importance of multilateralism, the importance of cooperation, because it's been a very short time since COVID ended, and I think it gave the world an example of how interconnected things are, and you cannot solve challenges that are planetary in nature if you don't have a means of collaboration, and you don't have a set of principles and a set of rules. And yes, there are challenges. Yes, there are inefficiencies, like in any organization. And so you can only imagine that in a multilateral system that consists of multiple countries, you're going to have certain challenges and things that can be improved and become better. And that's the direction that we should be heading. And that's partially what the SDGs do. They establish a framework that we can all use to collectively work together and prioritize and learn from one another and work towards. The last thing you want to do is take all of that work that has taken, all of the years since the end of World War II to establish, and throw it out the window just because of one election. So I think we need to remain positive. I think the global community, despite all of the stuff we get in the media, yes, like there's a lot of garbage going on right now, a lot of really difficult things happening in the world, but there's also a lot of really good work that is happening, and I think that's where we need to focus is let's stay the course.
Rohit, if I can,
presidents will come and go.
Sorry, Rohit, I just wanted to pick up on that point of there's still a lot of good things happening, because I do think in the case of the United States, at that level of the president and their leadership that way, sure, they're making some decisions that seem to go counter to the spirit of the SDGs. But I think when you don't have to look too far to find a number of really good examples of cities in the United States that are actually doing really amazing work, right, and really progressive things in that direction that's very much aligned with SDGs. So there's a lot of noise, I think, that gets and a lot of media attention that gets devoted to what's happening maybe at the higher level. But certainly there's really good examples happening more at the city level that shouldn't be ignored.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, no, I that was just, I wanted to try and understand, because how it was impacting the longer term goals, because it sounds like, again, it's I didn't understand when they made that when the Trump administration made that announcement, like what country that wants to be respected in the world as a global leader would say that they're opposed to reducing poverty, and they're opposed to gender equality and all the other things. So I just wanted to see if I could get that put into any kind of context. It seems like everything that's going on in the United States is using it as a ploy for something, and maybe this is a ploy for them to get the G7 to us to member countries to increase military spending to 5% of our GDP and these other things. But then we're gonna have less money to put towards these other initiatives. But just it's hard not to be pessimistic in this world right now. What's going on?
That's it. It is. What are we consuming? What are we? Where are we directing our attention. And you know, I guess just to say, I mean, yeah, there's tons of good stuff happening in the world. And, you know, I think this partnership is one example of where we're trying to elevate some of those stories. And so, you know, the great work that happens in Richmond Hill, part of what we want to do is also, you know, bring that up and share those stories out with you know, the rest of the UN system and other countries, so we can continue to learn from one another. We can continue to see all of the great work and initiatives and innovation that is happening to think along these lines of you know, sustainable development, because you know, you can't have an economy if there's this great image that I love to show about the SDGs. It's a kind of a cake model of the SDGs, and you know, the economic related SDGs, they all sit on the top layer of the cake, but at the base of that cake is, you know, the ecosystem and the biosphere related, you know, SDGs. And so, you know, we tend to think, again, very siloed, and we want to focus on, you know, an indicator like GDP as our end all be all. But the reality is that, you know, I think, and a lot of people are already tapped into this, you know, that is one indicator, and it does not make for a full life. And so, you know, we need to be, again, thinking more holistically, thinking more systemically, and really thinking and understanding that, you know, if that base of the layer collapses, none of this is going to matter, you know. So yeah, stay the course.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rohit.
Thanks.
Any other
everyone.
questions from any of the people still on the call while we
I
have
don't see
Rohit's
anything else on the
expertise?
chat either.
Okay.
Okay, if anything, please reach out to us. If any members of our staff here at the Sustainability Office, please reach out, and we could always continue the conversations and through other platforms. Thank you.
Okay,
Thank
thanks
you,
again,
everybody.
everyone, for attending. Have
Thanks,
a good
everyone.
rest of your day.
Thank you.
Sure.
Appreciate it.
Bye.